15 of these strangest Star Wars theories have lasted for years, kept alive by evidence the saga left sitting in plain sight. Some rest on moments the film showed openly, others live in the space between what the story confirmed and what it quietly refused to explain, holding on because they answer things the movies never wanted to touch. Some of what follows comes from the story the studio still holds as true, and some from the older tales set aside years ago, and together, they point somewhere the films only hinted at. A handful of these ideas are buried so deep in that material that once they surface, certain scenes stop playing the way they used to. R2-D2's refusal to follow orders across the original trilogy traces back to a single moment on Mustafar that was never resolved. In Revenge of the Sith, Anakin Skywalker landed on that world and told R2 to stay with the ship. R2 obeyed. He was still there when Padme arrived, still there when Vader turned on her, still on the ship as the disaster unfolded around the people he had served for years. Anakin walked into that facility and never came back. R2 had been with Anakin since the very beginning. He was there on Naboo when Anakin was still a boy flying a starfighter for the first time. He served beside him through the entire Clone Wars as his astromech, the droid riding in the back of his fighter. He flew into one engagement after another, and lived through battles that wiped out whole fleets. Keeping Anakin's starfighter running through firefights no other pilot could have survived. When the Republic fell and the Empire rose, R2 carried those memories into a new age, serving new masters who never knew what their droid had witnessed. He was the only one left who remembered Anakin Skywalker as he had been before the fall. One detail separates R2 from every other droid in the films. C-3PO had his memory wiped at the end of Revenge of the Sith, but R2 never did. He served Padme, then Anakin, then Luke across 3 eras, holding a full and unbroken record of every mission and every moment of trust between pilot and droid, straight through the death of the Republic and into the age of the Rebellion. When Luke came into his care, R2 was quietly serving the son of the man he had lost, and Luke had no idea. Across the original trilogy, R2 breaks the same order again and again. On Dagobah, Luke tells him to stay and watch the camp, and R2 follows him into the swamp. On Endor, R2 is told to wait at the landing platform and ends up in the middle of the fight at the shield generator. Each time, he rolls straight into whatever comes next. No other droid in the trilogy defies its master this consistently, and R2 does it every single time. He cannot stand being told to stay behind, because the last time he obeyed that order, he lost Anakin. One of Anakin Skywalker's final commands before becoming Vader was the order that separated them for good. Darth Vader once hired the galaxy's deadliest bounty hunter to chase the Millennium Falcon, and the choice may have been about far more than skill. Boba Fett, Captain Rex, and every clone who ever marched for the Republic came from one man, the bounty hunter Jango Fett. Boba was his unaltered clone. Rex was grown from the same template to serve as a soldier, sharing Jango's face and voice even though he was built for war. Anakin Skywalker spent the entire Clone Wars fighting beside Rex and thousands of men who looked and sounded exactly like the hunter Vader would later hire. They were his brothers in every way the war allowed. He fought beside them for years, trusted them with his life, and lost them across 100 battlefields. The animated series The Clone Wars built the bond between Anakin and Rex over 7 seasons into one of the deepest partnerships in the whole saga. Rex was the brother Anakin chose, the soldier who saw the man behind the title, and that closeness made every death feel personal. Then, Order 66 turned those same brothers against the Jedi, and Anakin became Vader. In The Empire Strikes Back, Vader stands on the deck of a Star Destroyer, hiring hunters to track a single ship. The clone army was long retired by then, replaced by recruited stormtroopers, the men he had served with aged out or gone. Then one of the hunters in front of him speaks, and the voice is the exact voice of every brother he ever buried. Every clone he lost on Geonosis, on Christophsis, on Umbara carried that same sound in his final moment. Now that voice stood on his bridge, offering itself for a price. Boba was already one of the finest hunters alive, so the hire made sense on reputation alone. Still, the shared blood and the shared voice are part of the record, and so is everything Vader lost to the men who carried them. A man sealed inside a machine that breathed for him, standing in a room where no one else understood what that single voice was doing to him. Long before that voice ever reached his bridge, one Jedi Master had quietly decided the Chosen One prophecy belonged to him. No one ever put it into words, but Mace Windu may have spent his life believing the prophecy of the Chosen One was meant for him. He doubted the boy from the moment Qui-Gon brought him before the Council in The Phantom Menace, and that doubt never softened. Mace stood among the greatest warriors the Jedi ever produced, and the old novel Shatterpoint tied him to a rare and dangerous fighting form called Vapad. Vapad asked its user to reach into their own inner darkness and turn it into a weapon, feeding on an opponent's fury while walking a line that would have swallowed almost anyone else. Few Jedi were ever trusted with a form that was close to the edge. Mace did not simply fight the dark side, he shaped himself into the weapon meant to end it. When the moment finally came in Revenge of the Sith, he was the one who pushed to arrest Palpatine in person, and he was the one who ended up standing over the Sith Lord with a blade at his throat. He placed himself at the very center of the most important confrontation in the Order's history, and he did it without a second of hesitation. Every step of the path he chose pointed towards one purpose: the destruction of the Sith. Then a 9-year-old from a desert world arrived, carrying a power reading beyond anything the Order had ever measured, and the destiny Mace may have quietly claimed for himself was handed to a boy he could not bring himself to respect. He never said the words out loud. Even so, every bit of friction between Mace and Anakin fits the shape of a man watching his purpose given away to someone he did not believe had earned it. One other master walked even closer to that darkness, and the day he seemed to fall to Palpatine may not have been a defeat at all. Yoda's retreat from Palpatine looked like the one fight the greatest Jedi ever lost, and it may have been a choice instead. Revenge of the Sith shows Yoda facing Sidious in the empty Senate, and in the end, walking away. The scene plays as a defeat. He loses his footing, falls from a Senate pod, and slips out through the lower levels while Sidious still stands. Most people watch it and see an old master beaten by a younger, stronger enemy. Two quieter threads suggest something else entirely. The first runs through the animated series, in the arc that carried Yoda to the ancient Sith world of Moraband. There, he walked through a vision quest and came face to face with a version of himself built from centuries of buried anger and cruelty. The shadow was not an outside enemy. It was Yoda, the one that appears when restraint falls away, and he had to admit that it was real before he can move past it. The story never framed that as a victory. It framed it as acceptance. The moment Yoda stopped pretending the darkness was not part of him. That reckoning came years before the Republic fell, long before Yoda had any reason to think he would face Sidious alone. By the time the Senate chamber arrived, he had already met the worst of himself and made his peace with it. The novel that retold Revenge of the Sith deepens the same idea, framing the aftermath of the duel as the moment Yoda understood that the entire Jedi way had failed as a philosophy. A master who already knew the exact shape of his own shadow, fighting a Sith in a place built on nothing but power and ambition, chose to step back before crossing a line he had drawn for himself long ago. The film shows a fall. The story underneath suggests a decision. The deepest question about Yoda has nothing to do with his wisdom or his choices, and everything to do with what he actually was. Yoda's kind has no name, no home world, and no origin on record, and the reason may be that they were never born at all. Only 3 of them have ever appeared across thousands of years of galactic history: Yoda, Yaddle, and the child known as Grogu. Every one of them was strong in the Force. George Lucas told his creative team to keep the mystery sealed, and the studio has guarded it ever since. Even after The Mandalorian pulled Grogu into the spotlight and made the species more familiar than ever, nothing new about their origins has ever surfaced. Grogu showed enormous power while he was still a toddler. He was raised in the Jedi Temple on Coruscant until Order 66 forced his escape, and even that young, his connection drew the attention of Jedi and hunters alike. No one trained it into him. It was simply there, as if the Force had placed it inside him from the start. He could lift creatures far larger than himself and mend wounds that should have been beyond him, all from a being who could barely walk. Yoda lived almost 900 years, then dissolved straight into the Force when his time came. Put those pieces together, and a strange idea takes shape. Yoda's kind may not be biological creatures at all. They may be living pieces of the Force itself, formed when the galaxy reaches a crisis that ordinary beings cannot solve. That single idea would explain everything else. The extreme rarity, the certainty of Force sensitivity, the missing home world, the way their bodies vanish at death. If the Force makes them only when the galaxy needs them most, then there should only ever be a few, and each should arrive at a turning point. Yoda, Yaddle, and Grogu all did exactly that. If the Force could shape life on its own, the Sith spent 1,000 years learning to decide who was allowed to keep theirs. Count Dooku believed he was the future of the Sith, and everything Palpatine did was quietly designed to make sure he never was. Dooku came to the dark side as a fallen Jedi, a former master who left the Order in disgust and took Palpatine's hand believing he would help remake the galaxy. Attack of the Clones revealed him as the secret apprentice hiding behind the name Tyrannus, the hidden second half of a Sith pair steering the galaxy towards war. He led the Separatists, commanded fleets, and carried himself like a man who was fully expected to sit at his master's side once the fighting was done. The Sith had survived for 8,000 years by one hard law: one master, one apprentice, and no more. The apprentice existed to grow strong enough to one day replace the master, which meant every apprentice was, in the end, temporary. Palpatine had already found his replacement, and it was not Dooku. From the moment Anakin's power showed itself, the Emperor had his eyes on the younger, stronger man. The Clone Wars was never only a war. It was a long audition, a way to harden Anakin, to cut him off from the people who steadied him, and to bring him close enough to the dark side to fall into it. Dooku's real role was to keep the galaxy burning until that day came. The truth of it lands in the opening minutes of Revenge of the Sith. Anakin and Dooku duel aboard the Separatist flagship, and Anakin wins, leaving Dooku disarmed and kneeling with two blades crossed at his throat. Palpatine, watching from his chair, tells Anakin to finish him. For one frozen second, Dooku understands. The master he served, the man who had promised him a throne, has just handed his life to a younger apprentice without a flicker of hesitation. Anakin strikes, and the rule of two moves forward exactly the way it was always meant to. The Sith were never the only ones willing to sacrifice one of their own for the sake of the larger plan. Obi-Wan Kenobi may have quietly helped the Empire find the aunt and uncle raising Luke, and the logic behind it is chillingly clean. Owen and Beru Lars were killed by Imperial troops hunting the stolen Death Star plans. The chain of events is well established. Vader's forces reached Tatooine, tracked the escape pod, found the Jawas who had scavenged the droids, learned who bought them, and followed the trail straight to the moisture farm. The Empire found the homestead on its own. Underneath that account, Obi-Wan may have nudged the outcome along. Anakin's love for his mother, rooted on that same desert world, had been one of the first cracks in his fall. Obi-Wan and Yoda both watched that love turn into ruin, and they had no intention of letting the same thing bind Luke. Owen and Beru were the only ties holding the boy to his farm. Remove them, and nothing was left to keep Luke on Tatooine. Obi-Wan had 19 years alone to decide how far he would go. 19 years in a desert hut, watching Luke grow up on the very planet where Anakin's attachments first took hold, tracing every step from a hopeful boy to a man sealed in black armor. He had all the time in the world to understand how love could be turned into a chain, and he carried that understanding into every choice he made about Luke. During the Clone Wars, Kenobi had already proven he could lie and chose the hard, cold path when a mission demanded it, once faking his own death and wounding the people closest to him to pull it off. No source has ever confirmed this specific claim, yet the theory survives because it fits the man too well to wave away. That same careful mind built something else into Luke from the very beginning, and it became the one thing Palpatine never saw coming. Luke Skywalker was raised to do the one thing the old Jedi Order forbade, and that difference may have been the entire point. Obi-Wan told Luke that Vader had struck down his father. It was a lie, and a very particular kind of lie. It did not hand Luke a living enemy to fear. It gave him a lost father to mourn, a memory to carry into every decision he ever made. Obi-Wan did the opposite of what the old order would have done. He gave Luke a ghost to love, and a dead man cannot be found or rescued, which is exactly what made the lie safe. On Dagobah, Yoda watched Luke wrestle with anger and impatience and never once punish him for the feeling itself. He taught the boy that flesh and bone were not what defined a living being. When the cave showed Luke his own face behind Vader's mask, Yoda let the vision stand without treating it as a failure. When Luke abandoned his training to save his friends, both masters objected, yet neither raised a hand to stop him. Yoda may have thrown out the old Jedi way on purpose. The novel of Revenge of the Sith describes Yoda concluding that the old path had been broken all along, a truth he reached after the spirit of Qui-Gon Jinn reached out from beyond death to teach him. Yoda chose not to raise the twins from birth the way the Order once demanded. He walked away from the very system that had made Anakin Skywalker, which meant Luke would grow up forming the bonds the old Jedi had forbidden. That love became the single thing Palpatine never planned for. The Emperor had spent his life studying Jedi doctrine and using its rigid rules against it, certain that teaching students to bury their bonds left cracks he could pry open. Luke never carried those cracks. He did not beat Palpatine with greater power or deeper knowledge. He won by refusing to give up on his father, and the old master had no defense built for a man who would not let go. The proof of what love could do arrived in the throne room, at the very edge of the fall Luke had been warned about since Dagobah. The vision Luke saw inside the cave on Dagobah was not a riddle to solve. It was a warning of the exact moment he would nearly become his father. In The Empire Strikes Back, Yoda sent him into a dark hollow beneath the trees and told him to leave his weapons behind. Luke carried them in anyway. Inside, he met a shadow of Darth Vader and cut the figure down with a single stroke. The severed mask split open, and the face staring back from inside it was Luke's own. Yoda offered no lesson afterward and let the image stand, because it was never meant to be explained, it was meant to be remembered. The warning underneath it was simple. If Luke ever struck an enemy down in anger, the man behind the mask would be him. He would take his father's place, not by losing a fight, but by winning one the wrong way. Every road that ran through rage led back to the same face inside the same helmet. In the throne room above Endor, that vision came within a breath of coming true. Return of the Jedi set Luke down in the exact spot the cave had shown him. Palpatine and Vader pressed on the one fear he could not master, the safety of his sister, until Vader threatened to turn her to the dark side if Luke would not fall. Luke's control shattered. He came out of hiding in a fury, drove Vader back across the platform, and hammered at him until Vader was down with his sword hand gone. Then Luke stood over a beaten, disarmed opponent, and the scene matched his vision frame for frame. Palpatine urged him to finish Vader and take his place at the throne. Years before, Anakin had stood over a disarmed Dooku and struck him down while Palpatine urged him on. Now the son stood over a disarmed father, and his eyes fell on his own hand, the machine one hidden beneath a black glove, the same kind of machine that kept his father alive. He saw the thing he was one swing away from becoming, and he let his weapon fall. Luke refused the blow that would have finished his father, and that refusal is what left the man beneath the mask something still to choose. Darth Vader's death may not have been forced on him at all, but chosen, in the one moment the machine could not decide for him. Palpatine's lightning tore through Vader's life support during the fight in the throne room. The film makes clear that Vader felt something fading and asked Luke to lift the mask so he could see his son with his own eyes. Yet Vader had survived ruin like this before. The series set in his early years as Vader showed his helmet cracked open in the middle of a fight, burying the ruined face beneath, and even then he refused to fall. He had been broken many times, and every single time, he had forced himself to keep breathing. This time, he did not fight it. He sat down, asked Luke to remove the mask, and said he only wanted to look at his son once. He knew exactly what taking the helmet off would do. For more than 20 years, that suit was the only thing keeping him alive. Every breath filtered through a machine built by Palpatine's surgeons, the mechanical rhythm of it more familiar to the galaxy than the ruined face beneath. The man who existed before the suit had been buried alive inside it, kept breathing by a device that never once asked whether he still wanted to be. He could have stayed sealed in it until the end. Instead, he asked his son to take it away, so nothing stood between them, and he met Luke as Anakin Skywalker. For over 20 years, that machine had decided every breath, every word, every measure of pain, and how long it would last. In his final moments, with his son leaning over him, Anakin made the only choice the machine could ever make for him. The freedom Anakin found in his last breath had been stolen from him decades earlier. inside a single quiet decision in the Jedi Council chamber. The day the Jedi Council refused Anakin the rank of Master, they shut the last door he could see to saving Padme's life. The novel of Revenge of the Sith lays the frustration bare. Anakin agreed to sit on the council as the Chancellor's representative because he expected the seat to carry the rank of Master, and the refusal landed as a deep insult and a sign the Order did not trust him. There was more underneath it than wounded pride. The rank of Master opened doors that stayed shut to everyone below it, the deepest and most guarded corners of the Order's knowledge, and Anakin had come to believe that something inside that knowledge was a way to save Padme from the death he kept seeing in his dreams. He could not simply ask. Explaining why he needed forbidden knowledge about death and the Sith would have meant confessing his secret marriage to a senator and the child no one on the council knew was coming. The knowledge sat behind a door only Masters could open, and the council had just refused him the key. On screen, it looks like a young man sulking over a title. Underneath, it is a husband watching the only path to saving his wife close in front of him, unable to say a single word about why it mattered. Palpatine was the one who placed him in that room, naming Anakin his representative so the council's distrust would land where it hurt most. He never had to turn Anakin against the Jedi himself. He only had to sit back and let the Order do the work for him, and the Order obliged, treating its most gifted member like a spy it could not bring itself to trust. He was not being proud or greedy. He was a man running out of time, told by the Order he served that he was not trusted enough to reach the one thing that might save the person he loved most. The Council shut the last door, but the fear that drove Anakin towards it had been growing since the day he lost his mother. The loss of Anakin's mother did more than push him towards the dark side. It built the exact trap Palpatine would spring years later. Shmi Skywalker was taken by Tusken Raiders on Tatooine and held for weeks in conditions that broke her. Anakin found her too late, and she died in his arms. The grief and fury that followed drove him to wipe out the entire Raider camp, his first true step into darkness and a wound that never healed. Years later, as the Clone Wars neared its end, Anakin began dreaming of Padme dying in childbirth. He believed those dreams completely, never once doubting them, and the reason was simple. The last time visions like these had come to him, warning of his mother's suffering, they turned out to be true. He had crossed the galaxy chasing that first vision and held his mother as she slipped away. His own life had already taught him that these dreams keep their promises. So when the dreams of Padme arrived, Anakin did not treat them as warnings. He treated them as certainties, because one of them had already come true in the worst way imaginable. By the time Palpatine leaned in and offered the dark side as a cure, Anakin was already halfway to believing him. He did not need convincing that the visions were real, since his mother's death had proven that in the cruelest way. He did not need convincing that the Jedi could not help, since they had already turned him away. The only hand still reaching towards him belonged to Palpatine. Some pushed the theory further and claimed that Palpatine arranged the whole chain, from the Raiders who took Shmi to the nightmares about Padme. The record blames the Tusken Raiders alone, and staging an abduction on a remote desert world falls apart without proof. Whether Palpatine caused that first loss or simply seized the opening it created, it was Anakin's own trust in his darkest dreams that carried him the rest of the way down. If Palpatine could shape a man's deepest fears precisely, the harder possibility is that he shaped the man himself. One of the most argued ideas in all of Star Wars is that Palpatine used the dark side to create Anakin Skywalker himself. The foundation is real. In Revenge of the Sith, Palpatine tells Anakin the legend of Darth Plagueis, a Sith so powerful he could shape life itself by bending the tiny living things that tie a being to the Force. Palpatine hints that he killed Plagueis once he had learned everything the Old Master knew. Anakin was born with no father to Shmi Skywalker on a remote desert world, carrying the highest such reading ever recorded. Palpatine took a personal interest in the boy the moment they met on Naboo and never let go of it for more than a decade. In one canonical comic, Vader falls into a Force vision that shows Palpatine's hands wrapped in dark energy around a pregnant Shmi. Fans treated it as the confirmation they had waited years for. A member of the studio story team stepped in publicly to explain that the scene was a vision inside Anakin's own head, not a statement of fact, and the writer agreed. Visions shaped by the dark side cannot be trusted, and Vader was deep inside one when the image came. It showed him the thing he already suspected. and whether the Force was revealing a truth or feeding his fear back to him was left wide open. Palpatine came within a single cut line of saying it out loud. An early draft of Revenge of the Sith had him tell Anakin directly that he could almost think of him as a father. Lucas removed the line before filming and chose to leave the answer buried. What remained was Ian McDiarmid's performance in the Opera House, and that performance is the reason the theory refuses to die. He pauses with care between his sentences, drifts his eyes towards Anakin, and lets his voice drop as the tale moves from Plagueis' power to his death. The whole scene lives in the gap between what he says and what he seems to mean. He plays it like a confession dressed as a bedtime story, telling Anakin the truth while pretending to spin a legend. Whether Palpatine made him or found him, Anakin still carried a prophecy, and its true meaning may have been the exact opposite of what the Jedi believed. The Jedi believed the Chosen One would destroy the Sith and lift the light to victory, and they may have read the prophecy exactly backward. It first reaches the audience in The Phantom Menace, when Qui-Gon Jinn brings a slave boy before the Council and insists this child will bring balance to the Force. The Jedi heard that word, balance, and quietly assumed it meant their own triumph. A galaxy swept clean of the dark side with the Order standing tall over it. That is not what the word means. Balance is not one side winning. It is two sides holding equal weight. When Qui-Gon spoke those words, the Jedi numbered in the thousands, spread across the galaxy as generals, guardians, and keepers of the light. The dark side had exactly two, a master and an apprentice, hidden in the shadows. The scale had tipped so far towards the light that the galaxy had almost forgotten what the other side even looked like. If the prophecy demanded true balance, almost all of that light would have to go out. And that is exactly what happened through Anakin. He did not fail the prophecy when he fell, he completed it. Order 66 and the years that followed cut thousands of Jedi down to a scattered handful in hiding, until the light and the dark stood closer to even than they had been in 1,000 years. The Jedi's own doubt runs quietly beneath all of it, since even in Revenge of the Sith, their leaders admit the prophecy could have been misread, that they may have placed their faith in words they never truly understood. Anakin was never the Order's savior then. He was the correction the galaxy had been waiting for. The weight dropped onto the empty side of the scale. Everything the Jedi feared about him was the very thing that made him the Chosen One, and their refusal to see it is what let it happen. They spent his whole life searching for the one who would restore balance, never once suspecting that restoring it meant the end of nearly everything they were. Anakin brought that balance at a terrible price, and the one who paid the most for it was the person he had turned to save. Padme Amidala did not die of a broken heart, and the dark side that killed her may have been guided by Palpatine's own hand. Revenge of the Sith gave her death an explanation that has never sat right. As she delivers her twins, the medical droid tending to her reports that she is physically healthy, with no injury and no cause it can find. Yet she is fading anyway, slipping away as though her life were simply being drawn out of her. A woman with everything to live for, 2 newborn children in the room, dies while every machine insists there is nothing wrong. Palpatine had already explained the power that could do such a thing. In the Opera House, he told Anakin the legend of Darth Plagueis, a Sith who had learned to use the dark side to keep the ones he loved from dying. A power that can hold a life in place can just as easily pull one loose. The same reach that saves a life can end one if the hand behind it decides to. The timing of her death tells its own story. Her final breath comes at almost the exact moment the surgeons finish rebuilding Anakin. The film cuts back and forth between the two beds, between the woman slipping away and the machine sealing the mask over her husband's ruined face. As Vader draws his first mechanical breath, Padme lets go of her last. A living Padme was a reason for Anakin to walk away from the darkness. A dead one, lost to a fall he believed was his own doing, was the thing that would keep him kneeling to Palpatine for the rest of his life. Palpatine let him carry the guilt. He let Anakin believe his own rage had crushed the life out of the woman he loved, when the power that emptied her may have flowed from the Master standing at his side. Everything Anakin gave up, everything he became, was built on a death that Palpatine may have caused and then handed him to carry alone. Anakin fell to the dark side to keep Padme alive, and his fall may have been the very thing that killed her. For an order that feared love more than any enemy, the Jedi built their entire downfall around it. Underneath every one of these 15 ideas sits the same quiet truth. A droid grieved a master no one knew he had lost. A father spent his final breath to look at his son with his own eyes, and a broken man fell to the dark side chasing the one person he could not bear to lose. Power never decided the fate of that galaxy. Attachment did, the very thing the Jedi spent 1,000 years trying to burn out of their own students. The mystery of what Yoda truly was runs deeper than any theory here could reach, and the fuller story is waiting inside the tale of Yoda. Every secret in this collection played out across the worlds whose buried history the films only ever brushed against, and the lore beneath them runs deeper still.